Well, hello, everybody. This is Jomo Johnson from SMS Novel. I hope and pray you are doing well. I am super excited to start this new endeavor as I communicate this wonderful vision of Affinity Church Planting in Rochester, New York. Again, smsnovel.com. I am Jomo Johnson. A little bit about me. I am a believer in Jesus. I am a United Methodist Church Youth Director, graduate of Westminster Theological Seminary, and I feel since and following a call to come to Rochester to help plant and start Affinity churches. But before we get into that, if you are new to the channel, please like and subscribe. And believe me, that's the first time I've ever said that. I've never invited people to like and subscribe. But I think what we're doing here in Rochester, New York is super duper important. And so I would love for you to be updated on any new videos or any new content that we have. Well, for those of you that don't know, I'm originally from Columbus, Georgia, have lived in the DMV area for the last 8 years. But this summer of 2026, I sensed a strong call to come to Rochester. Now, some of you might know some of the backstory of what led me there. I want to touch on it just quickly before we get to Affinity Church Planting and kind of what led to the vision. So long story short, I applied for a job for a youth director at Pittsford Presbyterian Church. Pittsford is right outside of Rochester. Seemed to be a good church, a good fit. You know, I have a seminary background. I've worked in the Presbyterian Church for years. So kind of my background. Process of 3 months, a long process from May to August before I received the offer letter. Once I received the offer letter, I was excited. I signed it, sent it back, and then was contacted by Pastor Aaron Neff, informing me that there was at least one objection by a Republican MAGA political candidate who happened to be an elder at the church. Long story short, that brought up more questions, and the job offer was rescinded. That left me really bewildered, shocked, surprised, a little bit sad as I was anticipating relocating, moving, and really being a part of this church family. And to lose a job offer for that reason, you can imagine it did hurt. But life goes on, right? And so I also wanted to sense how God might be using this, how God might be possibly using this as a clarion call to help establish ministries and churches for people who unfortunately get overlooked because of MAGA, white supremacy, or just because of who they are. And so this is where the identity and affinity church model came in, which it's not new. If you are familiar with church planting, you know the different church models of church planting. Affinity church planting in a nutshell, and I'm not reading anything, I'm kind of going completely off just on my own personal research. Affinity church planting model is gathering people not based upon geographical location, but based upon subculture, based upon perceived identity, or based upon affinities, things that they enjoy, things that they like, or things that they all have in common. So for an example, affinity church planting could look like, and this is actually something that was documented in a recent podcast on the church planting website, there was an affinity church plant for Disney workers. There was a gentleman who had a passion for Disney. I think his wife and he worked for the Disney company. And he had the idea and the thought to start a church plant solely for Disney workers. Very unique, very niche. But I think a more general idea, a more general thought as it relates to affinity would be, again, those certain subcultures or demographics, and also identities. So for an example, being part of the ASL community. That's something that is really big in Rochester, something that there's a lot of prominence. And I think being able to create ministries and even church for 100% ASL is a niche and also an affinity church idea. Another affinity church plant idea would be an affinity church plant for healthcare workers. Healthcare workers who oftentimes work off hours and various hours that may not be in line with a traditional Sunday or even a traditional Wednesday for a church, to be able to create a church for healthcare workers. Again, creating churches based upon affinities. And one of the biggest, I think, as it relates to me and people like myself, are affinity activist churches. Churches for those who truly desire to be activists and to advocate for those who may not be able to advocate for themselves. Activists and advocates oftentimes have an extremely difficult time assimilating in traditional churches, and therefore the thought and the idea is to create specific churches for those affinities. This is a unique idea, and honestly, I think if we look at it biblically, we see this is kind of the model from the very beginning, even in the book of Acts. The very church, which the Greek word is ecclesia, those who have been called out, it was an affinity. It was those who were tired, frustrated, those who had been beaten, burdened by the system of Rome and culture, those who hadn't found a place in common society, the church, those who had been called out of the world to be Christ's own. This is a unique thing. And I think the idea is based upon what Paul says in the book of Corinthians, where he states he has become all things to all people so that some might be saved. So basically becoming an affinity to specific groups in order to communicate, share the gospel. I honestly think that there is a lot of power and wisdom in this, but also know that there are some objections. So let's talk about some of the objections to affinity churches. And again, I'm not reading anything. I'm just going based upon my own research, but I think I can share pretty easily, pretty quickly, 3 common objections. Number 1, the church should be unified, bringing in all types of people. Absolutely, it should be. But in reality, it does not. Why? Because we're sinful, because we have certain theological and practical boundaries that prevent certain groups from being welcomed into some bodies of Christ. And I'm speaking primarily from an American context. Again, this is American Western context. I don't know completely what's going on in other countries, but I know American Western context. That many people like myself who have advocated for the poor, advocated for African American rights, we probably wouldn't fit in a traditional mainline church like Pittsburgh Presbyterian Church. Obviously, they rescinded the church offer. So even though the church is meant to be a welcoming haven for all people, unfortunately, not at all times. It's not. So understanding our limitations as humans and understanding our limitations primarily as denominations, it could be a great idea to create specific bodies of grace for specific bodies of people. The second objection would be kind of similar to the first, is that it creates division. Why are you having this particular group of people over here and this group of people over there? Well, the answer to that is there's already division in the body of Christ. The famous quote, if I'm not mistaken, by Martin Luther King, who said that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week, still remains true. The church is already divided. It is. White churches primarily worship with white churches. Black churches primarily worship with black members. It is what it is. And apart from a few maybe larger mega churches or intentionally multicultural churches, you don't see really a melting pot of black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Indian, and other races in a church. Again, small cases of mixed churches, but primarily the church represents and worships based upon their own type of people. And then the third objection that many people might have when it comes to affinity churching is why? We don't really need any more churches. Why not just strengthen and help the churches that already exist? Well, as someone who has been in ministry, going on 20 years now, I can say this for surety. Churches primarily do not work with outsiders or outside ideas or visionaries from the outside. No. Churches, like all of us, we're concerned with ourselves. We spend most of our time thinking about ourselves, our plans, our calendars, our agendas, our mission trips. And so when an outsider comes in and says, I have this idea, churches really don't want to hear that. Another thought is, well, do you really need more churches? Honestly, yes. Yes. Take in mind what I'm saying. Not more church buildings. You need more communities of grace. There never will be a non-need for more communities of grace, whether those communities are small or great. And therefore, I think that is why Affinity Church Planting is so powerful and has such potential in a place like Rochester, New York. Now, back to myself and the church planting that I am seeking to do in Rochester. First and foremost, I have planted a church before. In 2009, I planted Philly Open Air Church in Philadelphia. Started off as a street ministry, street outreach. But after being blessed by a check that came out of nowhere, I was able to get a building. And then we started hosting Sunday meetings. Didn't see a lot of fruit, didn't see a lot of success over the first month. But after the first month and after a lot of prayer, by the grace of God, God brought someone named Curtis Saxon, who had lived in the area, who was a Westminster graduate, a Princeton graduate. And he came alongside me and brought many people that he had been discipling. And we were able to grow the church to about 30 to 40 within about a year and a half. By the grace of God, the church still exists today as Ecclesia Church of Philadelphia. It's a great story, and I'm just always amazed when I think how God used me and my lack of knowledge to start something that will be eternal. Now, I also have failed at church planting. In 2019, I attempted to start a house church network, working with Luke 10, a wonderful house church planting organization out of Denver, Colorado. I was able to start 3 small house or community churches, and they lasted for about 4 to 5 months, but we weren't able to sustain them, primarily because we didn't have the right model for that particular demographic. It was a challenging experience, but also a joyful experience. Met lots of wonderful people, lots of great ministry, planted lots of great seeds, and did lots of discipleship. And sometimes church plants don't last, and that's okay. But I think what I've learned from the church plant that did work and the church plant that did not work is how now, by the grace of God, to start a church and plant a church in a community that will be fruitful and successful. And that is by focusing on affinity. If you are interested in learning more, I'll be doing a series of videos on Affinity Church Planting, sharing updates of what's going on, and also giving you updates of how you in Rochester, New York can help. Why is that? Because no church plant happens solo. No church plant happens with just a church planter. It happens with a team. And that is why at SMS Novel, we're looking for local Rochester people to come alongside as board members. If you have a passion for the ASL community, a passion for healthcare workers, a passion for activists or immigrants, a passion for seniors, this is for you to be able to bring your vision, your experience, your ideas to a local church plant. This is great, and I'm really excited about it. So if you are interested in learning more, please reach out to smsnovel.com or contact at smsnovel.com. Again, please like and subscribe because we're going to be doing more content about Rochester in Rochester. And I'm really excited about all those who are willing to participate in this new vision of Affinity Church Planting in Rochester. Again, my name is Jomo Johnson. I am super excited to start this journey with you. Please reach out, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. Thank you so much, and God bless.